Thank you for joining me today. It's Brian Gubernick, and welcome to the No Days Off podcast, where we believe that every single day brings a new opportunity to get better. As entrepreneurs, as business people, you've probably been in rooms or around leaders that have used the term think bigger. I've had lots of people over the course of my career say, we've all got to think bigger, or even have painted on the walls of their office, think bigger. I even have a business partner whose license plate says think bigger. What does that even mean? And more importantly, how do we go about actually thinking bigger? I know it may sound like a silly question, but what are the tactics? What are the action steps we can take if we want to expand our thinking, if we want to think bigger? First and foremost, let's get clear on how we define what thinking bigger actually means. Thinking bigger, to me, is this phrase that we would use to encourage entrepreneurs like you and me, or organizations, or just individuals to expand their perspective, to aim for more ambitious goals than what they may have originally set, or to examine even broader possibilities than they may have initially considered. It really involves looking beyond the immediate or the conventional or the comfortable ideas, and really considering what could be achieved if we leveraged our imagination, if we increased our effort, if we extracted more out of our resources. What it really means is to expand vision. It means to overcome limitations. It means to collaborate and influence. It just means to scale or think at a bigger scale than you were just a short bit ago. In business, for example, instead of launching a service or product maybe for your local market, you might actually consider, what would this look like for a global audience? Or in personal goals, if I was to think bigger, instead of aiming for, say, a small retirement or a small amount of money, maybe I set a goal that's massive, that's bigger than anyone else around me has ever thought. It's not just about retiring and funding my current life, but maybe increasing my wealth to a level that it serves generations to come. In terms of social impact, maybe rather than thinking about helping a few people, which is an amazing thing to think about, you might actually think about how to create a system that can help millions. Thinking bigger is about challenging yourself to envision and strive for something more significant than what's typical or immediately apparent, what's comfortable. Now, what steps can we take? What are the tactics that you can leverage, that I can leverage, if starting right now, I want to be a bigger thinker, I want to think bigger? I think there's a handful of things that come to mind for me, tactics that you could deploy to begin to expand the way in which you're thinking. The first thing that comes to mind for me is to challenge assumptions, is to question the status quo. I think we've got to regularly be asking ourselves and our team and those around us, why are things done a certain way? Why is that the acceptable practice? When you study those that think at an exponential level, a really big level, they're asking themselves questions like, why can't it be done this way? Or why is it done this way, but it can't be entirely different? They challenge the norms. They consider alternative approaches. Maybe one idea for you would be this inversion that we talk about so often, this reverse thinking. Consider the opposite of what you usually do. For example, if you're running a business and it's focused on cutting costs, maybe ask the opposite, which is, what could happen if I invested more in certain areas? We're just challenging assumptions. And in building this muscle to challenge assumptions, we very well may be expanding our thinking. Next thing that comes to mind for me in terms of thinking bigger, no surprise here, if you want to take a tactical step, it starts with expanding who you're spending your time with. Expand your network, connect with visionaries, surround yourself with people who are already thinking far bigger than you and have already achieved some sort of significant goal or goals That mindset, those experiences can inspire you, can influence you, and really broaden the way that you're thinking. These diverse perspectives from people in different industries or different walks of life or cultures or backgrounds, they give you new insights, they give you new ideas. They open up your mind and your eyes to things maybe you never considered possible. So in addition to challenging your assumptions, questioning the status quo, I want you to expand your network, get around those thinking big, which kind of leads to the next tactic. I would set rather audacious goals. We've talked about goal setting quite a bit here at No Days Off. I think there's setting goals, right, that you can achieve because we like to achieve things. We like to feel that success. Or there's another path to setting goals, which is setting these big, huge, massive goals, knowing that the likelihood of maybe attaining them or achieving them right away is slim, but we're going to build models and systems as if. This is when you hear the phrase like, take your goal, double it. Now double it again. If your goal was 100 widgets and I said double it, now it's 200 widgets, and I said double it again and now it's 400 widgets, but you've never sold more than 60 widgets, that 400 seems massive. And you likely are going to go after it, build models and systems to go after it, and you're probably going to fail. But the point though is when you shoot for 400 and you fail miserably, what is a failure, miserable failure? Probably 50%. You end up with 200 widget sales. That's what I mean when I say set audacious goals. 10x your thinking, as Dan Sullivan would say. Instead of aiming for, say, 10% improvement, consider what it would take to 10x your improvement. The way you think about 10% improvement versus 10x improvement is radically different. It forces you to think in radically different ways. We've probably heard of these moonshot goals, aiming for goals that seem almost impossible. Even if you don't fully achieve them, just like I was saying with 100 to 200 and 200 to 400, even if you don't fully achieve them, you're likely to go further than if you had set smaller goals. Elon wakes up every morning and thinks about how is he going to colonize Mars. And I actually believe he's going to colonize Mars. But just that goal alone is responsible for creating Tesla, is responsible for creating SpaceX, and a whole host of other things that he's doing. He may never colonize Mars, but the world will be forever changed because of that audacious goal. Challenge assumptions, expand your network, set audacious goals, tactical steps to thinking bigger. Next, I think about embracing learning and curiosity. Again, another theme here. You want to think bigger, you got to stay curious. You got to be learning at all times. You got to continually educate yourself on new trends, on new technologies. You got to aim to be ahead of the curve. The more you know, the more possibilities you can actually envision. So studying and reading and listening to podcasts while everybody else is doing things that they enjoy that might be different positions you to be thinking bigger, which is a comparative term, right? When you say you think bigger, you're thinking bigger than yourself yesterday, thinking bigger than others around you. So continuous learning, this embracing learning and curiosity, exploring even unrelated fields, studying industries or disciplines outside your usual scope. This cross-pollination of ideas from different fields can lead to breakthrough innovations for you. The last thing I'm thinking about when I am asking myself, God, what are the tactics for thinking bigger? I think you've got to stay resilient and persistent. Here's a scoop. When you're thinking bigger, it's a long-term commitment. See, most people, maybe myself to some extent, have not really fully embraced or understood the idea of geometric progression, the hockey stick. Yes, we've seen the graph. Yes, we've heard many talk about it, but we actually haven't lived that geometric progression. In order to do that, it's usually a pretty long-term commitment. Thinking big usually requires some sort of sustained effort. You've got to stay committed to your vision, even when progress slows. You've got to be adaptable. Adaptability is kind of my new favorite word this week, because you got to be willing to adjust your strategies and your goals and your plan, as we just discussed in the episode yesterday, 369. You got to be willing to adjust your strategies and your goals and your plan as you learn more, as circumstances and environment change, but you keep this bigger vision, this bigger thinking in sight. So by applying these tactics I'm talking about, you could begin to train yourself to think bigger. You could identify more ambitious opportunities. You could ultimately achieve more significant results. As I'm talking about thinking bigger, and we're going to wrap up with this, if you're unfamiliar with Steve Jobs' reality distortion field, go look it up. It's probably something we should do a separate podcast on here in the near future. But Steve had this reality distortion field. It was this term people used to describe his ability to persuade himself and to persuade others to believe in his vision. This crazy think big vision that led people to accomplish seemingly impossible tasks. He was persuasive. He had high expectations. He drove his people insane because of the selective reality that he created, but he also inspired them. He also motivated them. And ultimately, his thinking bigger reality distortion field led to the development of the original Macintosh in 1984. It led to the impossible launch date for the iPhone of 2007. It led to the launch of the Think Different campaign in 1997 that Apple ran. His reality distortion field is a great example of thinking bigger. It's something we ought to learn a little bit more around. I think it's in the cards for a future conversation. So, the focusing question for you: what steps are you going to take today to expand your thinking, to be an individual that is thinking big, that's achieving bigger goals, that's just inspiring others around them to grow and develop and just further the way in which they're thinking? That's all I have for you today, the No Days Off podcast. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, every single day brings a new opportunity to get better. So let's get after it.